America hides its darkest stories in plain sight. A quiet town, a peaceful trail, a lonely motel room with one broken light. These are the places where nightmares are born, not from fiction, but from real lives shattered by the unexplainable. Some say they imagined it. Others never lived to tell, but tonight you'll hear what most people are too afraid to say out loud. These are 14 terrifying true stories from across the United States. Stories whispered in police stations, scribbled in journals, or told by survivors with trembling voices. From abandoned homes to cursed highways, every story in this video carries one thing in common. Someone lived through it. And now you will too. So turn down the lights, lean in close, and don't look away, because what starts as a story might end with a shadow behind you. Have you ever felt the air turn heavy, as if it knows something you don't? My name is Clara, and last December, I discovered how a single moment can unravel everything you thought was safe. I lived alone in a small house on the edge of a rural town, where the nearest neighbor was a distant speck, and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. That evening, I'd planned to lose myself in the comfort of routine. A warm fire, a soft blanket, and the faint glow of the TV. But outside, a storm was brewing, a blizzard that would bury the world in white and bring something far darker to my doorstep. The day had started innocently enough. It was early December, and the air carried a biting chill that seeped through every crack. Snow had been falling since noon. Light at first, but by late afternoon, it thickened into a relentless curtain, driven by winds that howled through the trees. The news on the TV warned of a blizzard starting at 5, with gusts strong enough to topple power lines and snow deep enough to trap anyone caught in its grip. I had no intention of going anywhere. My house, though modest, was a sanctuary. Wooden walls that creaked with age, a fireplace that filled the living room with a golden warmth, and windows that framed the chaos outside like a painting I could safely admire. I busied myself with small tasks, folding laundry, brewing tea, rearranging books on the shelf. By 7, I settled onto the couch, the fire casting flickering shadows across the room, the TV droning softly about road closures and emergency alerts. But you know that feeling, don't you? When the world feels too still, too quiet, like it's holding its breath for what's to come. I glanced out the window, expecting to see nothing but the endless swirl of snow. The storm had worsened, reducing visibility to almost nothing, a white void that swallowed the landscape. My backyard stretched out beyond the glass, a wide, open expanse with no fence, blending into a narrow road that led nowhere for miles. It was the kind of road you'd only take if you were lost, or if you had a purpose no one else could guess. I was about to turn away when I saw it, a shape, faint and ghostly, moving through the blizzard. It was a person, a tall figure, their outline blurred by the snow, walking with an eerie calm as if the storm meant nothing to them. They moved steadily toward the edge of my yard, where the snow and darkness merged into an impenetrable wall. I pressed my face closer to the glass, my breath fogging the cold pain, my heart tapping a rhythm of unease. Who walks through a blizzard like they're on a casual stroll? I stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for them to reappear. They didn't. The snow erased any trace of them, leaving only the howling wind and my racing thoughts. My backyard wasn't a place for strangers. It was too remote, too exposed. The road they were heading toward was a dead end, a path that stretched on for miles with no shelter, no destination. No one could survive that walk, not in this weather. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a hunter, maybe, or a neighbor I didn't know. But the unease lingered, a cold weight in my chest, as I returned to the couch. The TV's chatter felt hollow now, the fire's warmth unable to reach the chill that had settled inside me. What if they weren't lost? What if they were looking for something, someone? 5 minutes later, a sharp knock broke the silence, 3 deliberate raps that echoed through the house. You ever feel your body react before your mind catches up? My heart jolted, my hands trembling as I stood, the blanket slipping to the floor. I crossed the room slowly, each step heavier than the last, the hardwood cold against my bare feet. Through the peephole I saw him, a man bundled in a heavy winter coat, his face unnaturally pale, his nose a stark red from the cold. His eyes were what stopped me, too still, too intense, as if they were searching for something beyond the door. "Can you help me?" he asked, his voice low and steady, cutting through the wind. "I'm waiting for a ride. It's freezing out here. Can I come in just for a few minutes?" His words sounded reasonable, almost pitiful, but there was something in his tone, a rehearsed quality like he'd said it 100 times before. I stood there, my hand hovering over the lock, torn between compassion and instinct. You want to trust people, don't you? The storm was merciless. Snow piled high against the porch, the wind biting at anything exposed. Part of me imagined him shivering, desperate, a man in need of kindness. But another part, deeper and quieter, screamed to keep the door shut. His eyes hadn't softened with gratitude. They'd sharpened with something I couldn't name. "You can wait on the porch," I said, my voice unsteady. "There's a roof to keep the snow off. I'll get you a jacket." He nodded, a smile curling his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stepped to the side, settling into the old wicker chair I kept out there, his gaze never leaving the door. I turned the lock, the sound louder than it should have been, and hurried upstairs to the spare closet. My hands shook as I pulled out an old coat, tattered, too big for me, but it would do. As I descended the stairs, coat in hand, I felt it again, that pressure, that sense of being watched. You know that moment when your instincts scream louder than your thoughts. I stopped just short of the door, my hand inches from the lock, and leaned toward the peephole. The chair was empty. The man was standing right against the door, his hand gripping the handle, his body tense as if ready to force his way in the moment I turned the key. His face was close, too close, his breath fogging the glass, his eyes locked on the peephole like he knew I was there. Fear isn't just a feeling, it's a force, a tidal wave that drowns you. My pulse thundered in my ears, my hands trembling, so badly I nearly dropped the coat. I stumbled back, fumbling for my phone, my eyes never leaving the door. I dialed 911, my voice barely above a breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "There's a man outside my house," I told the operator, my voice breaking. "He's trying to get in. Please, hurry." The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. Promising help was on the way, but every second stretched into eternity. I crept back to the peephole, my heart in my throat, and looked again. The porch was empty. The chair was empty. The snow swirled, untouched, as if he'd never been there at all, but he was real, wasn't he? The police arrived 20 minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the storm like blades. They searched the porch, the yard, the road beyond, but found nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no trace of the man. The snow should have held his steps, but it was pristine, a cruel mockery of my fear. I told them everything. The figure in the backyard, the knock, the man at the door, his hand on the handle. They listened, their faces kind but skeptical, and promised to patrol the area. As they left, the house felt too big, too quiet. The fire's warmth now a faint echo of safety. Let me tell you about my neighbor, old Tom, who lived 3 miles down the road. He was a gruff old man, full of stories about the land and its secrets. One night, over coffee, he told me about a blizzard from years ago, when a stranger came to his door asking for shelter. Tom let him in, and the man stayed for hours, silent, staring at the windows. When Tom woke the next morning, the man was gone, along with a knife from the kitchen. "Storms show people's true faces," Tom had said, his voice heavy with warning. I thought of his story as I sat on the couch, the coat still clutched in my hands, the door locked tight. What would have happened if I'd opened the door? That night I didn't sleep. I kept the lights on, the phone close, my eyes darting to every window. The storm raged on, burying the world in white. But it wasn't the wind that kept me awake. It was the image of that man, his hand on the handle, his eyes searching for a way in. You can lock every door, but some shadows don't need a key. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted. But I know one thing. He wasn't waiting for a ride. And somewhere, in the heart of another storm, he might be knocking again. The snow fell like a whispered secret, cloaking the world in silence, but something was wrong. Lila felt it in her bones, a shadow waiting beyond the frost. Last January, Layla had carved out a week of solitude after the New Year's chaos, craving the stillness of her small apartment in a sleepy complex. The city was dusted in snow, roads slick with ice, and most folks were back at their desks, leaving her to wander stores and savor the quiet. That day, she'd spent hours drifting through shops, the cold nipping at her fingertips, before returning home by 7 p.m. The apartment welcomed her with its familiar hum, the radiator's soft groan, the faint glow of a table lamp. She sank into the couch, a bag of chips crinkling in her lap, the TV flickering with some mindless sitcom. Her eyelids grew heavy, the day's weight pulling her towards sleep, but the warmth of the room held her like a cocoon. "Feel that peace, Leela. Let it wrap around you," she thought, unaware of the fracture about to shatter it. The clock ticked toward 8:30 p.m. when a sharp buzz sliced through the haze. The PA system, wired to the building's entrance, jolted her, upright. Who's out there in this weather? Her heart gave a curious thud. No one was expected, no friends, no deliveries. The buzz came again, insistent, like a finger tapping her spine. Lila rose, her socks whispering against the hardwood, and crept to the window overlooking the front door. She parted the blinds just a sliver, enough to peer into the snowy dusk. A man stood below, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a hood. The snow swirled around him, but she could make out his age. Mid-40s maybe, with a weathered stance. He wasn't one of the three neighbors she knew by sight. Why is he here? Her mind raced. If he lived here or was visiting, someone else would have let him in. The buzz sounded a third time and Lila's fingers twitched. She padded to the PA system, her thumb hovering over the mute button. "Don't answer, Lila. Stay safe." She pressed it, silencing the call, and returned to the couch, the TV's laugh track now sounding hollow. She told herself it was nothing, a lost traveler, a mistake. But the image of that man, standing alone in the snow, clung to her like damp cold. An hour slipped by, the sitcom fading into a blur. Lila's eyes drifted shut, her body sinking deeper into the cushions. By 10 p.m., she shuffled to her bedroom, the apartment's quiet now a heavy blanket. She collapsed onto the bed, sleep claiming her almost instantly. Drift away, Lila, let the world fade. But the world had other plans. Hours later, maybe 2 a.m., maybe later, a sound tore her from sleep. A deep, resounding thud like a fist against wood echoed from beyond her bedroom door. Her eyes snapped open, her pulse hammering in her throat. What was that? The room was pitch black, the snow outside muffling all but the faintest creaks of the building. She lay frozen, straining to hear, her breath shallow. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. It's nothing, just the wind, just a dream. But her body knew better. Her skin prickled, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. Lila slid out of bed, her bare feet cold against the floor. She inched toward the door, her hand trembling as it grazed the handle. "Listen, Lila, be sure." She pressed her ear to the wood, the silence on the other side deafening. No footsteps, no voices, only the faint groan of the building settling. She turned the handle, the door opening with agonizing slowness, and peered into the living room. Shadows pooled in the corners. The TV's standby light a dim red eye. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt wrong, heavy with an unseen presence. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the darkness, and then she saw it. The front door was wide open. Snowflakes drifted inside, melting into tiny puddles on the floor. Her heart lurched, a scream clawing at her throat but never escaping. This isn't real. It can't be. The open doorway gaped like a wound, the cold air slithering in, wrapping around her ankles. Lila stumbled back, her mind spiraling. Someone's been here. Someone's still here. She crossed the room, her eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. As she passed the bedroom door, she noticed something new. A deep dent in the wood, right by the knob, as if someone had struck with a heavy object. They tried to get in. Her legs buckled, but she forced herself to move, retreating to the bedroom and locking the door behind her. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with panic, and dialed 911. "Someone's... my apartment," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she crawled into the closet, pulling the door shut. The cramped space smelled of wool and dust, the slatted door her only shield. "Stay quiet, Lila. Stay alive." She clutched the phone, the operator's calm voice a lifeline, but her eyes stayed glued to the bedroom door, waiting for it to burst open. Minutes crawled by, each second an eternity. The apartment remained silent, but the silence was a predator, coiled and waiting. Is he gone? Is he watching? Lila's mind replayed a story her grandmother once told, a tale of a woman alone in a storm, hearing knocks that weren't there, only to find footprints circling her house. "Focus, Lila, don't drift." The memory anchored her, keeping her tethered to the present. When the police finally arrived, their boots thudding through the apartment, Lila emerged, trembling to find the place empty. The intruder had vanished, leaving only the open door, the dented wood, and those fleeting snowmelt puddles. The officers searched but found no prints, no clues. They guessed the man had buzzed every apartment until someone let him in, targeting Lila's unit for reasons unknown, maybe thinking it was empty. The dent, they said, was odd. A single strike, not an attempt to break in, but a burst of frustration, as if the intruder had changed his mind. Lila still lives in that apartment, the dent a constant reminder etched into the door. You're safe. Now, Lila. But are you? Every creak of the building, every shadow in the snow carries the weight of that night. Who was he? What did he want? The questions linger, unanswered, like footprints buried under fresh snow, waiting to resurface. The snow wasn't falling. It was devouring the night, a relentless beast that swallowed every sound, every hint of warmth. I was alone on a forsaken highway, my car's headlights barely slicing through the suffocating white veil. 8 hours. Into a punishing drive, a motel's flickering sign appeared like a cruel mirage. But some places don't offer shelter. Some places hunt. Last winter, I embarked on a 15-hour journey to visit family, a marathon through roads buried under snow and ice. No reservations, no itinerary, just a battered sedan, a playlist on repeat, and a stubborn will to keep going. The snow began as a soft whisper, brushing the windshield with delicate flakes. But by the 8th hour, it had turned feral. It pounded. The car, a merciless barrage that blurred the world into a shifting haze of white and gray. My eyes stung, raw from straining against the storm, and my hands ached, knuckles white from gripping the wheel. Each mile felt like a descent into a frozen abyss, the road stretching endlessly, mocking my exhaustion. What's that sound? A faint hum pierced the engine's steady growl, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the tires, but something softer, more sinister, like a voice murmuring beneath the storm's roar. I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue. I'd been driving too long, pushing past reason, past safety. My phone's GPS had died miles ago, the signal swallowed by the wilderness, and the last gas station was a fading memory. I needed to stop. I needed to survive. Then, through the blizzard, a sign flickered. Motel Rest Haven. A dilapidated one-story structure, its paint peeling like old skin, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. The neon sign buzzed, half its letters dead, casting a sickly glow over the lot. It wasn't much, but it was everything in that moment. A lifeline in a frozen void. I pulled off the highway, tires sinking into fresh snow, and rolled into the parking lot. The place was a ghost town. No cars, no lights in the windows, just the sign's faint hum cutting through the wind's howl. The cold assaulted me as I stepped out, a brutal force that clawed through my jacket, sinking into my bones. I zipped up to my chin, my breath fogging, in the frigid air, and trudged toward the office. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a cramped room that reeked of stale coffee and neglect. A chipped counter stood in the center, a handwritten sign perched on it. "Be back in 15, coffee break." I glanced at my watch, 12:03 a.m. A coffee break at midnight, in a blizzard? The absurdity of it gnawed at me. I waited, straining to hear footsteps, a voice, anything. But the silence was suffocating, broken only by the wind's mournful wail outside. The walls seemed to close in, the dim light flickering, casting long shadows that danced like specters in the corners of my vision. Something's wrong. The thought slithered into my mind, cold and sharp, as I stepped back into the lot. I scanned the area again, and the realization hit me like a punch. Mine was the only car here. Not a single tire track marred the snow, as if the world had forgotten this place or abandoned it. My chest tightened, a knot of dread forming deep inside. Maybe the clerk had walked to a nearby diner. But there was nothing for miles, just endless snow and darkness. I climbed back into the car, cranking the heat to stave off the chill, trying to silence the growing unease. "You're exhausted. Calm down." I leaned back, intending to wait, but the warmth of the car wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and my eyelids betrayed me. I slipped into darkness. "Wake up." The command tore through my sleep, a jagged blade of instinct. My eyes snapped open, heart slamming against my ribs. The car was a tomb of ice, the heater long dead, its warmth replaced by a biting cold that seeped into my marrow. Snow had buried the windshield, turning the world outside into a featureless white void. My watch glowed faintly. 3:17 a.m. Hours had passed, stolen by the storm. The motel sign still buzzed, a sickly heartbeat in the night, but something else caught my eye. A shadow moving just beyond my window. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, a sharp, painful hitch. There, inches from the glass, was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden in the depths of a hooded jacket. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the window, and I felt his gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. "He sees you." My pulse roared in my ears, a deafening drumbeat as he stepped back, shouting something into the storm. I followed his gesture, and saw it. A pickup truck idling on the far side of the lot, its headlights off. A hulking shadow against the snow. Another figure emerged from the driver's side, moving with a deliberate stride, his silhouette sharp against the blizzard. This isn't help. This is a trap. The realization crashed over me, a wave of icy terror that jolted my sluggish limbs into motion. The first man circled my car, his gloved hands testing the door handles with a chilling precision. The second approached, a crowbar, glinting in his grip, its metal catching the faint glow of the motel sign. They weren't lost travelers. They weren't here to help. This was a setup, and I'd driven right into it. Panic surged, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys, the metal slipping in my sweaty palms. The first man raised the crowbar, and the back window shattered, an explosion of glass that sprayed across the seats like jagged confetti. A blast of freezing air flooded the car, carrying with it the scent of snow and menace. "You're not dying here." I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine sputtering to life with a reluctant groan. The first man reached through the broken window, his arm groping for the door handle, his fingers brushing the lock. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning uselessly in the snow, kicking up clouds of powder that obscured the world outside. The second man was at my door now, pounding on the glass, his face a blurred mask of rage through the storm. I rocked the car back and forth, desperation fueling every movement. As the first man climbed halfway through the back window, his hand grazing my shoulder, his breath hot and ragged against the back of my neck. Then, a miracle. The tires caught. The car lurched backward, a violent jolt that threw the man off balance. He tumbled into the snow, a dark shape against the white as I spun the wheel, the car fishtailing toward the exit. The second man sprinted for the truck, his figure shrinking in the rearview mirror, but I didn't look back. I floored it, the car skidding onto the highway, the motel vanishing into the storm like a bad dream. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the wind, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was alive. I drove for miles, the snow still falling, the night still swallowing the world in its icy maw. When I finally reached a gas station, its lights a beacon in the darkness, I pulled over and called the police, my voice trembling as I recounted the nightmare. They found the motel, but it was empty. No truck, no men, just the shattered glass from my car scattered in the snow like a grim reminder. The clerk claimed he'd been there all night, but his story didn't hold. Up his eyes darting too quickly, his hands fidgeting. The police suspected the motel was a lure, a trap set for weary travelers, a place where predators waited in the shadows for someone like me to stumble into their web. You escaped, but they're still out there. The thought haunts me, a specter that lingers on every dark road, every time I pass a flickering motel sign. I don't know what those men wanted, my car, my money, or something far worse. But I know this. Some roads lead to places you're not meant to survive, and some nights, survival is all you can hope for. Have you ever been alone in a place so quiet? The silence feels like it's watching you. Back in my early 20s, I worked the overnight shift at a small retail store, a local chain with just a handful of locations, far from the bustling big box stores you might imagine. It was the kind of place where time seemed to crawl, where the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the aisles stretched on like endless tunnels. Most nights I was the only one there, and that solitude became my companion, my enemy, and eventually, my terror. It was a typical shift, one I'd done countless times before. The store was small with only 8 or 9 locations across the region, and it never got too busy, especially at night. I was the overnight lead, tasked with stocking shelves, organizing inventory, and keeping the place running until the morning crew arrived. Sometimes I'd have a coworker to share the load, but more often than not, it was just me, the shelves, and the hum of the lights. I didn't mind the solitude, at least not at first. I'd move slowly, deliberately, stretching out my tasks to fill the long hours. That night I started by loading up a cart with boxes, pushing it into the aisles to restock. My mind wandered as I worked, drifting to random thoughts. Dinner plans, a movie I wanted to watch, anything to keep the monotony at bay. But you know how it feels when something pulls you out of that haze, don't you? When the world shifts, and you're suddenly, painfully aware of everything around you. I'd made it through 3 aisles when a sharp knock at the front entrance jolted me out of my thoughts. It was so sudden, so out of place that I froze, a box of cereal still in my hands. I wasn't even sure I'd heard it at first, my mind too foggy from the repetitive work. But then it came again, louder, echoing through the empty store like a warning. I set the box down and walked to the end of the aisle, my sneakers silent on the tiled floor. Through the large front windows I saw him, a man in a hooded jacket, standing at the glass doors, his face hidden in shadow. I approached, the door keeping the glass between us, and called out, "We're closed. We don't open until 8 in the morning." He didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, his eyes glinting faintly under the hood. I pointed at the sign on the door, its bold red letters spelling out the store hours. "We're closed, sorry," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze unyielding, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I watched him go, my heart tapping an uneasy rhythm. There were no cars in the lot, no signs of where he'd come from or where he was going. Who comes to a closed store in the middle of the night with no way to get there? I shook off the unease and returned to my work, convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe he was lost or confused about the hours. By 2 in the morning, I'd stocked half the aisles and decided to take my lunch break. I left the cart where it was and headed to the break room at the back of the store, a small space with a rickety table, a microwave, and a flickering light. I sat there for about 30 minutes, eating a sandwich and scrolling through my phone, the incident at the door already fading from my mind. When I finished, I tossed the rest of my meal and walked back to the main floor, my steps echoing in the stillness. But you know that moment when the air changes, when you feel eyes on you before you even see them? As I reached the aisle I'd been working on, I looked up, and there he was. A man walking past the other end of the aisle, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't seem to notice me, his head turned away, but I knew instantly it wasn't. Right, the store was locked. I was alone. My breath caught in my throat, my body freezing as a wave of fear washed over me. I ducked into the aisle, pressing myself against the shelves, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I listened, straining to hear his footsteps over the hum of the lights. They moved toward the break room, the same direction I'd just come from, each step a quiet threat. He's inside. How did he get inside? I stayed hidden, my mind racing, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the shelf. The footsteps paused, then turned, heading back toward the main floor. I waited, holding my breath, hoping he'd leave, hoping I was wrong. But then I heard it, the rhythm of his steps quickening, turning into a run, the sound growing louder, closer. He saw me. I bolted for the other end of the aisle, my sneakers slipping on the tiles, my hands fumbling for the keys in my pocket. I glanced back and there he was, the man in the hoodie, his face still hidden, sprinting toward me with a terrifying intensity. I reached the front door, my fingers shaking as I jammed the key into the lock, twisting it with desperate force. The lock turned just as he reached the end of the aisle, his shadow looming large against the glass. I shoved the door open and stumbled outside, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. As I stepped out, a bright flash lit up the corner of my vision, followed by a deafening sound that made my ears ring. A gunshot, so close I couldn't tell where it had hit. I didn't stop to look. I ran, my legs burning, my breath coming in. Ragged gasps until I reached my car parked at the edge of the lot. I dove into the back seat, locking the doors behind me. My hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone as I dialed 911. "Someone's in the store," I told the operator, my voice trembling. "He shot at me. Please hurry." I stayed. There, crouched in the darkness, my eyes locked on the store, waiting for him to emerge. But he didn't. When the police arrived, their lights cutting through the night, he was gone. They searched the building, finding the back door busted open, a pile of heavy tools left beside it. The most chilling discovery was the bullet hole, embedded in the wall just inches from the front door, where I'd been standing moments before. Let me tell you about an old coworker, Jake, who used to work the overnight shift before me. He'd always warned me about the back door, how it was too easy to break, how the store was a target for desperate people. One night, he'd found pry marks on the lock, but nothing had been taken. "It's only a matter of time," he'd said, his voice heavy with unease. I thought of Jake as I sat in the police station, giving my statement, the weight of that night settling into my bones. The police believed the man had suffered some kind of breakdown, a psychotic episode that drove him to target me simply because I was there alone. But they never found him, never learned why he'd come or what he'd planned to do if that bullet had found its mark. I quit the job soon after. I couldn't go back, couldn't face those aisles, that back door, the memory of his footsteps echoing closer. You can escape a moment, but some fears follow you forever. For years I was on edge every night, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected sound. I still don't know who he was, or why he chose that night to shatter my sense of safety. But I know one thing, the silence of that store will never feel the same again. Midnight at the gas station. The snow fell like a shroud, muffling the world. But Evan felt it. A presence lurking just beyond the light, waiting to step into his nightmare. Evan had been tethered to the overnight shift at the rural gas station for nearly a year, a job he despised with every fiber of his being. The 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. hours were a necessity, though. His mother's medical bills piled up, and daytime work wouldn't fit his fractured schedule. That night, a heavy snow descended, transforming the station into a lonely beacon amidst a sea of white. He pulled into the lot, his sedan's tires carving through the fresh powder, parking beside the only other vehicle, a battered truck belonging to his coworker. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of burnt coffee and gasoline. Evan exchanged a tired nod with his colleague, who shrugged on his coat and left without a word, the door closing behind him with a faint thud. "You're on your own now, Evan. Just you and the endless night." The station's hum enveloped him, the low buzz of the refrigerators, the faint flicker of a neon sign casting jagged reflections on the snow outside. A crumpled note from his manager sat on the counter. Restock the chips, mop the floors, check the pumps. Simple tasks, maybe an hour's work at most. Evan decided to pace himself, dragging out the chores to keep sleep at bay, his eyes already heavy from the long drive. He slumped behind the counter, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the empty aisles. His phone glowed with mindless videos, cat compilations, cooking tutorials, anything to distract from the monotony. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, piling higher against the windows, turning the world beyond into a blurred void. Around midnight, a faint beam of light cut through the storm, and an old SUV rolled into the lot, stopping at Pump 3. Who would be out in this weather? Evan glanced up, expecting a late-night traveler, perhaps a trucker seeking shelter. The vehicle sat there, engine off, headlights dark, doors shut tight. Snow began to settle on its hood, a thin layer at first, then thicker, as if the car had been there for hours. Evan returned to his phone, but a nagging unease took root, a whisper in the back of his mind. Something's off, Evan, pay attention. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and the SUV hadn't moved. He stood, his chair scraping against the linoleum, and pressed his face to the window, his breath fogging the glass. The lot stretched out, empty, the pumps standing like silent sentinels. No one was outside, and the SUV looked abandoned, a relic forgotten in the storm. What if they're hurt? His thoughts drifted to a tale his uncle once shared. A trucker found frozen stiff in his cab, overlooked for hours because no one bothered to check. Don't let that happen, Evan. Be sure. He watched, waiting for any sign of life. A flicker of movement, a shadow in the driver's seat. But the dark windows stared back, unyielding. 20 minutes in, the stillness became unbearable. Evan grabbed his jacket, the fabric stiff and cold against his skin, and stepped into the night. The wind howled, biting at his cheeks, snowflakes stinging his eyes like tiny needles. This is foolish, Evan. Go back inside. But he pressed on, his boots sinking into the drifts, each step a battle against the storm. The SUV loomed closer, its shape distorted by the swirling snow, a hulking mass of metal and shadow. He reached the driver's side, cupping his hands against the window, squinting into the darkness within. Is anyone in there? Are you okay? His voice sounded fragile, swallowed by the wind's relentless roar. The seats were empty, no shapes, no outlines, just an eerie void. It's empty, completely empty. Confused, he circled the vehicle, his gloved hands brushing against the icy frame, searching for any sign of life. There were no tracks, no disturbances in the snow around the car, as if it had simply appeared out of nowhere. As he turned to head back, his gaze dropped to the ground, and his breath caught in his throat. Footprints, a single set, deep and deliberate, carved into the snow, leading from the SUV toward the side of the building, not to the front entrance, but to the shadowy alley that flanked the storage room. His stomach twisted, a cold dread settling in his chest. Someone's here, Evan. They're close, too close. The footprints stretched into the darkness, disappearing around the corner, and the cold seeped deeper, not just into his bones, but into his thoughts, urging him to flee. Evan hurried back inside, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the small heater by the counter, holding his fingers to the warm air. Calm down, it's just a customer. Maybe they needed something from the back. But the footprints haunted him, their path too purposeful, too wrong. He tried to distract himself, scrolling through his phone again. But the station felt different. Now, its hum no longer a comfort, but a warning. The aisles stretched out, their shadows deeper, the fluorescent lights flickering ever so slightly. Listen, Evan. Hear the silence beneath the storm. Then it came. A heavy sound like a sack of grain hitting the floor, echoing from the back of the building. His heart lurched, pounding against his rib cage. He spun around, eyes darting across the empty store, the aisles bathed in a sickly pale light. It's nothing, just the wind playing tricks. But the floor told a different story. Small puddles of dirty water, fresh and glistening, trailed from the back door, the melted snow streaked with mud. Someone's inside right here with you." His pulse roared in his ears as he moved, slow and deliberate, toward the storage room. The air grew colder, thicker, as if the station itself was holding its breath. He rounded the corner, the darkness of the storage room swallowing the light, and there, behind a shelf, a shape emerged. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face a dingle of scruffy beard, his eyes locked on yours. Evan froze, time slowing to a crawl, the world shrinking to that gaze. Cold, unblinking, like a predator sizing up its prey. "He sees you, Evan. He's been waiting." Evan's legs moved on instinct, backing away toward the counter, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Don't look back, Evan, just move, get away." He grabbed the store phone, his fingers clumsy with panic, and dialed 911, his voice a hushed plea. "There's someone in my store in the back," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the storage room's doorway, expecting the man to emerge at any moment. The operator's calm voice felt distant, drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. He's still there, watching, waiting. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity, each second a test of his nerve. The station remained silent, no footsteps, no movement, but the absence was worse, a void that screamed danger. Evan's mind raced, replaying a story his father once told. A gas station worker who vanished on a snowy night, leaving only his car behind, the engine still running. "Focus, Evan, stay here, stay alive." The memory anchored him, keeping him tethered to the present, but the fear gnawed at him, a relentless whisper in the dark. When police lights finally pierced the storm, their red and blue beams cutting through the snow, Evan's relief was fragile, a thin thread ready to snap. He pointed the officers to the storage room, his voice trembling as he recounted the man's presence. They returned moments later, their faces grim, shaking their heads. "He's gone, vanished like a ghost." The man had disappeared, leaving only a ring of wet footprints around the back door, the melted snow a testament to his presence. Outside, a trail of tracks stretched into the vast, dark field beyond the station, a black expanse that swallowed the horizon. The officers followed the prints as far as they could, but the snow was too deep, the night too dark. "He's out there, Evan, somewhere in the void." Days later, the search yielded nothing. No body, no clues. The field was endless, stretching for miles, and the storm had erased any hope of answers. The SUV, towed away for investigation, proved to be a dead end, its ownership a mystery, as if it had never existed at all. Evan still works the night shift, but the station is no longer a refuge. The shadows stretch too far, the silence too heavy, and every flicker of the neon sign feels like a warning. You're alone, Evan. But are you really? The footprints are gone, buried under fresh snow, but the man's eyes linger in his memory, cold and unyielding, watching from somewhere beyond the storm, waiting for another night to return. The night was a shroud, heavy with the kind of silence that presses against your chest, broken only by the soft patter of snowflakes against my windshield. I was a delivery driver, just another cog in the machine, ferrying pizzas through a sleeping town. But some deliveries aren't what they seem. Some orders are bait, and I was about to take the hook. Last December, I was juggling shifts at a local pizza joint to scrape by during college. The job was simple. Drive, deliver, repeat. Snow had been falling all evening, a steady curtain that turned the streets into a slick white maze. It made every trip longer, every step colder, but the orders kept coming, piling up faster than I could keep up. I didn't mind the grind. There was a rhythm to it, a numbing routine that kept my mind off the chill seeping through my jacket. At 9:30 p.m., I grabbed my next set of orders. 2 deliveries, 5 minutes apart, but a 15-minute drive from the shop. In this weather, That meant closer to 25 minutes, maybe more. The addresses were in a part of town I rarely ventured into, a forgotten corner where the houses were old and crumbling, where the streetlights flickered like they were on their last breath. The drive started innocently enough, my headlights cutting through the snow, illuminating empty roads lined with skeletal trees. But as I turned onto a narrower street, the world seemed to shrink. The houses here were relics, their windows dark, their yards overgrown with shadows. Most of the shops that once dotted this area had shuttered years ago, leaving behind a ghost town where no one came unless they had to. The GPS led me deeper, past abandoned lots and sagging fences, until I reached the first address. I parked, on the curb, the snow soaking through my boots as I trudged to the door. An elderly man answered, his smile warm but tired, and paid in crumpled bills. I handed over the pizza, the transaction quick and uneventful, and returned to my car, shaking, off the cold as I set the GPS for the next stop. Something's not right. The thought crept in as I drove deeper into the neighborhood. The houses grew scarcer, the spaces between them stretching into eerie voids of darkness. Trees loomed on either side, their branches heavy with snow, casting jagged shadows that danced in my headlights. By the time I reached the second address, I couldn't see another house for miles, just an isolated structure surrounded by a sea of pines, their needles whispering secrets in the wind. I parked on the street, the chill biting at my skin as I grabbed the pizzas and approached the house. The porch was small, the wood creaking under my weight, and the air felt heavier here, thick with an unspoken warning. I knocked, the sound swallowed by the night, and waited, my breath fogging in. The frigid air, the cold was relentless, seeping through my jacket, turning my clothes into a damp, heavy burden. She's watching you. The door opened after what felt like an eternity, revealing a middle-aged woman with a face that seemed carved from exhaustion. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes hollow, as if sleep had eluded her for days. I forced a smile, holding out the boxes. Your order, 2 pizzas. That'll be the total on the receipt. She took the boxes, setting them on a table just inside the door, her movements slow, deliberate. Wait here, she said, her voice flat, emotionless, as she turned to fetch the cash. I stood there, the cold gnawing at me, my unease growing, with every passing second. She returned after a minute, her hands fumbling with a wad of crumpled bills, counting them with agonizing slowness. Then, as if to fill the silence, she started asking questions. How my day was, if I liked the job. Mundane things that felt out of place in the stillness of the night. I answered politely, but her tone, her sluggish movements, the way her eyes darted past me, it all felt wrong, like a performance meant to keep me there. Look behind you. The command surged through me, a primal instinct I couldn't ignore. I glanced back at my car, just a quick turn of my head, and that's when I saw him. A man, tall and broad, standing by my driver's side door. He was peering through the window, his hands working at the handle, trying to force it open. My heart slammed against my ribs, a jolt of adrenaline flooding my veins. I turned back to the woman, and her face had changed, her tired expression replaced by a cold, furious glare. Before I could react, she lunged, her hands grabbing my arm with a strength I hadn't expected. "Now!" she shouted, her voice a sharp command that echoed through the night. The man by my car spun around, his heavy boots crunching through the snow as he sprinted toward us. "Run! Run now!" I yanked my arm free, shoving the woman back with all my strength. She stumbled, her grip loosening just enough for me to break away. I bolted off the porch, my feet slipping on the icy ground as I ran for the trees. The forest loomed ahead, a dark labyrinth of pines that swallowed the moonlight, but it was my only chance. Behind me, the man's footsteps pounded through the snow, each one a thunderous echo that grew closer, louder, more relentless. I plunged into the woods, branches clawing at my face, the cold air burning my lungs. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move, to reach for me, as if the forest itself was alive and hungry. I ran for what felt like an eternity, my heart a frantic drumbeat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The man's footsteps faded after 2 minutes, the distance between us growing, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I stumbled onto a street, the forest spitting me out into a quiet neighborhood. My legs trembled, my body screaming for rest. But I kept moving until I found a spot with enough signal to call the police. I hid behind a row of bushes, my voice shaking as I whispered into the phone, recounting the nightmare. 10 minutes later, an officer arrived, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Another patrol car went to the house, catching the man in the act of trying to break into my car. The woman was gone, vanished into the night, but the man's arrest revealed their plan, a desperate scheme to rob delivery drivers, luring them to isolated addresses with fake orders. I was their first target, a guinea pig for their twisted game, and I'd escaped by mere seconds. They're still out there. The thought lingers, a cold weight in my chest, every time I take a late-night delivery. I see that woman's hollow eyes. In every shadow, hear the man's footsteps in every quiet moment. I survived that night, but the fear, it never leaves. Some jobs come with risks you can't see, and some nights, you're just one wrong turn away from becoming prey. Have you ever driven down a road so empty, it feels like the darkness is alive? Last winter, in the early days of February, I found myself on such a road, working a late-night DoorDash shift that would turn into a nightmare I'd never forget. It was nearly midnight, and I'd been driving for 4 hours straight, delivering orders across the city. The exhaustion was creeping in, a heavy fog that dulled my senses. But I had one last delivery to make before I could call it a night. The streets were slick with ice, the snow falling lightly, dusting everything in a deceptive calm. I knew I needed to stay focused. Falling asleep at the wheel on a night like this could be deadly, but the warmth of the car and the rhythm of the road were lulling me into a dangerous daze. I was on a side road, a quiet stretch that connected 2 main towns in our area. It was the kind of road where you could drive for miles without seeing a single soul. No houses, no buildings, just a 5-mile expanse of nothing but trees and shadows. The snow crunched softly under my tires, the headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the icy path ahead. I was halfway through this stretch when it hit me. A wave of tiredness so intense it felt like my body was shutting down. My eyelids grew heavy, my grip on the wheel loosened, and for just a few seconds I lost focus. That was all it took. The car hit a patch of ice, sliding sideways with a sickening lurch. I snapped awake, my heart racing, but it was too late. I tried to steer back onto the road, my hands trembling, but the car slid off the pavement and into a shallow ditch between the road and the woods. The impact was soft, cushioned by the snow, but it jolted me enough to make my hands shake. I knew immediately I wasn't getting out of this easily. The car was stuck, tilted on the incline, the tires buried in thick snow. I sat there for a moment, my breath fogging in the cold air, trying to calm my racing heart. I didn't even bother getting out to check the damage. It was too dark, too cold, and I knew it was hopeless. I tried to maneuver the car, shifting gears and pressing the gas, but the wheels spun uselessly, digging deeper into the snow. You ever feel trapped, like the world is closing in around you? I was stuck alone on a road where no one would pass for hours. My phone had a signal, thank goodness, and I called my dad, knowing he'd still be awake. "I've slid into a ditch," I told him, my voice shaky. "I can't get out, can you help?" He was calm, reassuring, promising to call roadside assistance and drive out to wait with me. "I'll be there in a few minutes," he said, and I felt a wave of relief clinging to the hope of his arrival. But that relief didn't last long. As I waited, my eyes scanned the road, the headlights of my car casting a faint glow across the icy pavement. That's when I saw them. Another set of headlights further down the road, just sitting there. At first I thought it was a passing car, but they weren't moving. They were parked, their beams steady, piercing the darkness like eyes watching me. Who parks on a road like this in the middle of the night? They were too far to have stopped to help, but not far enough to miss my headlights. The coincidence sent a chill down my spine, colder than the air outside. I kept my eyes on those lights, waiting for any sign of movement, but after a few seconds they vanished. The road plunged back into darkness, too deep for me to see anything beyond my own beams. Had they driven away? Or had they just turned off their lights? The uncertainty gnawed at me, my paranoia growing with every passing second. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint howl of the wind, a sound that seemed to carry a warning I couldn't quite grasp. 3 minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. My eyes locked on the road, barely blinking. Then I saw him, a figure emerging from the darkness, walking slowly toward my car. He was coming from the direction of those headlights, his pace deliberate, unhurried, as if the cold and snow meant nothing to him. My headlights caught him. As he approached, revealing a man in a hoodie, the fabric pulled low over his face, hiding his features in shadow. He stopped about 15 feet from the front of my car, just standing there, facing me, unmoving. You ever feel fear so raw it turns your blood to ice? I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them boring into me through the darkness. My hands trembled as I reached for the horn, pressing it lightly a few times, hoping to signal that I saw him, that I was aware. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, a silent threat in the glow of my lights. My heart pounded, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. I grabbed my phone to call my dad again, but as I did, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as if he'd never been there. I called my dad anyway, my voice trembling as I told him about the strange man, the headlights, the fear that was now choking me. "I'm a minute away," he said, his voice steady, grounding me. I stayed on the line, clutching the phone like a lifeline, my eyes scanning the road. 30 seconds later, headlights flared to life down the road, the same spot where they'd been before. They moved toward me, slow and deliberate, until the car parked directly across the ditch. The lights went out, and I heard a door open, the sound sharp in the stillness. I shouted into the phone, "Someone's here, they're getting out!" But before I could say more, another set of headlights cut through the night. My dad's car, pulling up right in front of me, blocking my view. I heard him yell, his voice sharp and commanding, and the other car's door slammed shut. The vehicle sped off into the darkness, tires spinning on the ice, disappearing as quickly as it had come. My dad got out, his face pale but determined, and told me the man had been holding something in his hands, something that looked like a tool to break into my car. Let me tell you about a story I heard from another driver, a guy who'd been doing DoorDash for years. He'd warned me about late-night deliveries, about the kinds of people who prey on drivers in isolated areas. One night, he'd been followed on a similar road, a car trailing him for miles before he managed to lose them at a gas station. They Wait for you to be vulnerable, he'd said, his voice low, haunted. I thought of his story as I sat there waiting for roadside assistance, my dad by my side. The car didn't have much damage, just a few scratches, but the relief of being safe couldn't erase the terror of that night. I don't know what that man had planned. What would have happened if my dad hadn't arrived when he did? Some dangers leave no trace, but their shadows linger. I still drive for DoorDash, but I avoid those empty roads now, and every set of headlights in the dark makes my heart race, a reminder of how close I came to finding out what lurks in the night. The rain hammered the warehouse roof, a relentless roar that drowned out the world. But Caleb sensed it, a shadow stirring in the storm, a threat creeping closer with every drop. Caleb had spent the last 2 years as a mechanic at a small family-run car shop in his quiet town, a place that had stood for decades, its history etched into the weathered walls of an old warehouse. The shop was surrounded by a sprawling chaos of rusted vehicles and scattered parts, what they called the scrapyard, though most of it was just cars waiting for repairs. Caleb's job was to manage the inventory, tracking stock as it came and went, a task best suited for the stillness of the overnight shift when the shop lay empty. It also made him an unofficial night watchman, keeping an eye out for vandals, or thieves who might scale the fence to pilfer from the scrapyard. On this night, he arrived at 8:12 p.m., the sky heavy with storm clouds, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and motor oil. He shared a brief conversation with his boss, who was eager to escape the coming rain, and soon the warehouse was his alone. The rain began to fall, its steady rhythm against the metal roof a strange symphony of chaos and calm, filling the cavernous space with a restless energy. Settle in, Caleb. It's just another long night. He settled at his desk, a cluttered island of papers and tools, the glow of a single lamp casting long, jagged shadows across the concrete floor, the storm outside a constant companion. Caleb sifted through the day's orders, a routine that kept his mind occupied, his pen scratching against paper as he checked off parts used during the day. Most were standard: filters, belts, spark plugs. But 2 cars required specific components, and one, a gray Nissan Versa, was missing its model year, a detail that could derail the entire order if incorrect. He stood, stretching his stiff limbs, the chill of the warehouse seeping through his flannel shirt. He began searching the rows of shelves, weaving through stacks of car parts, the air heavy with the metallic tang of rust and grease. The Nissan wasn't there, its absence a quiet frustration that gnawed at him. Of course, it's out in the scrapyard on the one night it's pouring. He returned to his desk, taking a moment to sip bitter coffee from a chipped mug, the warmth of fleeting comfort against the damp cold that clung to the walls. After a brief pause, he grabbed his jacket, the fabric stiff with age, and a flashlight, its beam a thin lifeline in the dim interior. He approached the back door, the rain's roar growing louder as he pushed it open, stepping into the storm. The downpour had intensified, a relentless curtain of water that soaked him instantly. But through the haze, he spotted the Nissan, tucked between 2 other wrecks in the scrapyard, its shape barely discernible in the rain. Just get the model year, Caleb, and get back inside. He moved quickly, flashlight in hand, the beam slicing through the deluge, illuminating rusted hoods and shattered windshields, the scrapyard a labyrinth of forgotten machines. Halfway across the yard, a flicker of movement halted him, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. Something's there, just beyond the edge of the light. It was subtle, a shift at the periphery of his vision, like a figure darting behind a car, the motion too deliberate to be a trick of the storm. The rain's roar swallowed any sound, leaving Caleb stranded in a void of noise, his senses straining. Against the downpour, He froze, flashlight raised, the beam trembling in his grip as it swept across the yard. "I saw you! Get out of here!" His voice cut through the storm, sharp with a mix of authority and unease, though his pulse quickened, thudding in his ears. "It's probably just kids, Caleb. Don't let your mind run wild." He called out again, his words lost to the rain, and took a cautious step forward, the flashlight's beam dancing over the wrecks, searching for any sign of life. The scrapyard remained still, the cars standing like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching and twisting in the flickering light. He moved closer, sweeping the area, but found nothing. No footprints in the mud, no movement, just the relentless rain. Maybe it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks. Relieved, he hurried to the Nissan, scribbling the model year on a soggy scrap of paper, the ink smudging under the rain's assault. He jogged back to the warehouse, the cold water seeping through his clothes, a heavy weight that clung to him as he stepped inside. He peeled off his jacket, shaking off the excess water, and returned to his desk, his hand steadier as he filled out the order, the warmth of the warehouse a fragile comfort. An hour later, around 12:30 a.m., Caleb moved to the main warehouse to count stock, a monotonous task that kept his mind from wandering. He walked along the towering shelves, clipboard in hand, ticking off items, spark plugs, oil filters, brake pads, the rain's rhythm above a constant, almost hypnotic drone. "Focus, Caleb, you're nearly done." Then a heavy sound reverberated through the warehouse, a deep impact that seemed to shake the air itself, and the lights went out, plunging the space into darkness. A void, absolute and suffocating, swallowed everything. Caleb froze, his clipboard slipping in his grip, his eyes straining against the pitch black that enveloped him. The rain's roar filled the silence, a deafening curtain, but beneath it a new sound emerged. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the warehouse. "They're coming closer, Caleb. They're here with you." His heart pounded, each beat, a frantic drum against his ribcage as the footsteps grew louder, their echo bouncing off the walls, a relentless approach that pinned him in place. The darkness was a physical weight pressing against him, leaving him nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The steps were close now, maybe 10 feet away, their rhythm a countdown to something inevitable, something he couldn't escape. "They don't. Know you're here, Caleb. Stay still, stay silent." Then, as suddenly as they'd begun, the footsteps stopped. Caleb held his breath, the air thick with tension, his body coiled tight, every muscle taut with fear. A faint rustling followed. Aye. Box being opened, items shifted with careless hands. Before the footsteps retreated, their echo fading into the distance. The warehouse fell silent again. The rain's drone the only sound remaining, a steady reminder of the world outside. "They're gone, Caleb. But for how long?" He waited, counting the seconds, his breath shallow, until he was certain the intruder had left. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone, its flashlight a weak lifeline in the dark, and dialed 911, his voice low and urgent as he reported the break-in. He made his way to the breaker room, each step cautious, the beam of his phone's light bouncing off the shelves, casting eerie shadows. He flipped the power back on, the lights flickering to life with a hum, illuminating the warehouse once more. When the police arrived, they searched the space, finding only traces of the intruder. Wet shoe prints snaking across the concrete floor, leading out the back door. "They slipped in while you were outside, Caleb, while the door was unlocked." The officers confirmed a theft. Tools and gear were missing, taken in the brief window of darkness. But the intruder was long gone, vanished into the storm. Caleb stood among the shelves, the reality sinking in, heavy and cold. They didn't know you were there, but what if they had? The thought lingered, a chilling weight, a reminder of how close he'd come to danger. He never saw the intruder, never knew their intent, but the possibility that they were armed, ready for violence, haunted him. The warehouse, once a familiar refuge, now felt alive with shadows, each shift of the rain against the roof a whisper of what might have been, a warning of what could still come. The rain didn't just fall. It poured like a veil of whispers, cloaking the night in a shroud of uncertainty that felt alive, almost sentient. I was a delivery driver, navigating a lonely road under a sky that wept endlessly, my headlights barely piercing the deluge that blurred the edges of reality. The world outside my car was a watercolor painting of grays and blacks, smeared by the storm's relentless hand. But some roads hold secrets darker than the storm, and that night, I drove straight into one, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the next bend. It was early spring last year, a season that should have brought renewal but instead drenched the world in a ceaseless downpour, as if the sky itself mourned some unspoken loss. I worked as a delivery driver for a popular restaurant in town, ferrying orders through streets that glistened like mirrors under the rain's assault. The night started like any other. I arrived at the restaurant at 6 p.m., the air heavy, with the scent of dough and marinara, the kitchen bustling with the kind of controlled chaos I'd grown accustomed to. I picked up a handful of orders, each one a small lifeline to keep me busy, to keep my mind off the storm that raged outside. The rain had been falling all day, a steady rhythm that turned the asphalt into a slick, treacherous surface, reflecting the faint, flickering glow of streetlights. Most of my deliveries were quick, in and out of neighborhoods where lights glowed warmly through windows, where families sat around tables, safe from the storm. But this order was different. It was 10 miles out, leading me into the woodsy outskirts of town, a place where the streets were swallowed by towering trees, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The houses here were few and far between, scattered like forgotten relics in a landscape that felt more wilderness than suburb. The drive felt endless, the rain hammering against my windshield with a ferocity that made my wipers struggle to keep up, their rhythmic swiping a futile battle against the deluge. I followed the GPS down a winding road, the kind where the trees formed a tunnel of shadows, their canopies knitting together to block out what little light the moon might have offered. The air inside the car was damp, the heater doing its best to fend off the chill that seeped through the windows, fogging the glass with my breath. Only one car trailed behind me, its headlights a distant flickering comfort in the emptiness of the night, a small reminder that I wasn't completely alone. It wasn't unusual to see another vehicle out here, but the solitude of the road pressed against me, a quiet weight that made the air feel thicker, heavier, as if the storm itself was a living thing watching, waiting. The further I went, the more isolated it became. No streetlights to guide the way, no signs of life to break the monotony, just the rain and the endless stretch of asphalt that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. What's that ahead? The thought jolted me from my reverie. A sharp spike of adrenaline cutting through the fog of fatigue. A sudden beam of light sliced through the darkness, blinding me for a heartbeat, as if the storm had birthed a monster of its own. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding on the wet road, tires struggling for grip as a beat-up sedan swerved into view, stopping sideways to block the entire path. The car behind me screeched to a halt, so close I could feel the heat of its engine through my rear window, the proximity sending a shiver down my spine. My heart raced, the shock of the moment freezing me in my seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sedan's headlights were still on, their glare harsh and unyielding, a piercing white that made it impossible to see who or what was inside. It felt deliberate, calculated, as if the driver had waited for the perfect moment to cut me off. Their headlights off until the last second to catch me off guard, to trap me in this watery cage of rain and darkness. You're trapped. The realization settled in like a cold weight in my gut, sinking deep into my bones. The car behind me was too close to back up, its bumper nearly kissing mine, and the sedan blocked the way forward, its rusted frame an impenetrable barrier. I was stuck, a sitting duck in the middle of nowhere, the rain drumming a relentless beat on the roof of my car, each drop a reminder of my vulnerability. The driver behind me laid on their horn, the sound sharp and frustrated, cutting through the storm like a scream in the night. I should have been more skeptical, should have sensed the danger lurking in the shadows of the storm. But in the chaos of the moment, my mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe they'd fallen asleep at the wheel, maybe it was an accident, a momentary lapse in judgment. But deep down, I knew better. The way the sedan had moved, the precision of its placement. It wasn't random, it was a trap, and I was caught in its jaws. After what felt like an eternity, the honking stopped, the silence that followed somehow more oppressive than the noise. I glanced in my rearview mirror, watching as the driver behind me, a large man with a furious expression, stepped out into the rain. His jacket was soaked through in seconds, the fabric clinging to his broad frame as his boots splashed through puddles, sending ripples across the glassy surface of the road. He marched past my car, his anger palpable, a storm of his own making. As he approached the sedan, he pounded on the driver's window, his voice muffled by the rain but unmistakably hostile. Each word a thunderclap of frustration. I couldn't hear the words, couldn't see what was happening through the sedan's tinted windows. But I watched as he gestured wildly, his fists banging against the glass, the sound a dull thud against the backdrop of the storm. Then, something changed. His movement slowed, his shoulders stiffened, and a look of pure, unadulterated terror crossed his face, as if he'd seen something inside that car that stripped away every ounce of his bravado. He stumbled back, his eyes wide, his breath visible in the cold air, and hurried back to his car, his earlier fury replaced by a palpable fear that sent a chill racing down my spine. Get out. Now. The command surged through me, a primal instinct that overrode every rational thought. The driver's side door of the sedan opened, and a man stepped out, his thick hoodie obscuring his face, the rain sluicing off him like he was part of the storm itself, a creature born of water and shadow. My chest tightened, a wave of dread washing over me, colder than the rain that soaked the world outside. I was still trapped, my only escape being to abandon my car and run into the woods, a terrible idea, but the only one I had. The woods loomed on either side of the road, a dark expanse of tangled branches and muddy earth, their shadows shifting in the rain like living things, watching, waiting. The man moved quickly, his stride purposeful as he approached the car behind me, his boots splashing through the puddles with a rhythm that matched the frantic beating of my heart. I watched, my breath shallow, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. As he reached the door, his hand raised to strike, his intent clear in the way he moved. Predatory, relentless. But the other driver reacted faster, slamming his car into reverse with a desperation that mirrored my own. His tires screeched on the wet pavement, the sound a high-pitched wail as he lost control, his car veering off the road and crashing through the underbrush. Branches snapped under the weight of his vehicle, the sound sharp and violent, until it slammed into a tree with a sickening thud that echoed through the night, the impact swallowed by the rain. I could see the faint glow of his taillights through the trees, a dim red pulse that flickered and died, leaving him stranded in the darkness of the woods. The man in the hoodie turned, his gaze locking onto me through my side mirror. His eyes, hidden but his intent clear, a hunter who'd found his next prey. My blood ran cold, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the gear shift, my fingers slick with sweat. I threw the car into reverse, flooring the gas, the tires spinning on the wet pavement as I backed away from him, the car lurching with a violence that matched the storm. He started toward me, his pace quickening, his boots splashing through, the rain with a relentless rhythm, each step closing the distance between us. I spun the wheel, the car fishtailing as I turned around, the world outside a blur of rain and darkness. I sped off into the night, the road a slick ribbon of danger that threatened to pull me back into the trap I'd just escaped. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out the rain, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I pushed the car to its limits, the sedan shrinking in my rear-view mirror until it was swallowed by the storm. I drove for what felt like hours, the rain still falling, the night still cloaking the world in its watery embrace. When I finally found a gas station, its neon sign a flickering beacon in the darkness, I pulled over and called the police, my voice trembling as I recounted the nightmare that had unfolded on that lonely road. An officer arrived 15 minutes later, his flashlight cutting through the rain as he searched the scene. They found only the wreckage of the other car, wedged against a tree in the woods, its driver shaken but alive. The sedan was gone. The man in the hoodie vanished into the storm like a ghost, leaving no trace of his presence, no clue to his motives. The police couldn't say what had happened, couldn't piece together the fragments of that night, but the implications were clear. Something sinister had unfolded on that road, something I'd narrowly escaped, something that left me questioning every shadow, every flicker of movement in the rain. I can't help but think about the other driver, the terror on his face, the way he'd fled into the woods, his car a twisted wreck against the unyielding trunk of a tree. What had he seen in that sedan? What had made him run, abandoning all sense of reason? If he hadn't been there, if I'd been alone on that road, I might not be here to tell this story, might not have escaped the fate that awaited me in the rain-soaked darkness. Some roads hide monsters. The thought haunts me, a shadow that lingers every time I drive at night, every time the rain falls, its rhythm a reminder of that night. I don't know what that man wanted, what drove him to set that trap, what he saw in me that marked me as prey. But I'll never forget the way his gaze burned through the storm, a predator's stare that followed me long after I'd left that road behind, a stare that still haunts my dreams on rainy nights. At 8 p.m., the fire pit cast a warm glow over Noah's isolated cabin in Utah. But beyond the flames, a pair of eyes watched, unblinking, waiting for the moment to strike. For the past decade, Noah had carved out a quiet existence in the rural heart of Utah, his small cabin nestled in a community of like-minded souls who valued solitude. The town center, with its modest shops and diner, lay a few miles away, but most residents, including Noah, lived in cabins scattered across the landscape, surrounded by farms or vast stretches of open land. Noah's property was a simple one. No farm, just a wide expanse of grassy fields that rolled gently toward the rugged silhouette of the mountains in the distance. It was a place of peace, a sanctuary where he could escape the noise of the world. On this night nearly 10 months ago, Noah followed his evening ritual, sitting outside by the fire pit, the flickering flames casting a soft light across his laptop screen. He did this almost every night, weather permitting, the routine a soothing end to his day, a way to unwind before retreating to bed. The air was crisp, the sky a deep velvet dotted with stars, and the warmth of the fire wrapped around him like Familiar embrace. Let the fire soothe you, Noah. Let the night take you in. He scrolled through emails, the glow of the screen a stark contrast to the darkness beyond, unaware of the shadow about to disrupt his solitude. An hour passed, the fire's steady rhythm lulling Noah into a state of calm focus, his fingers tapping lightly against the keyboard. Then a faint sound broke through the stillness, a rustle from the darkness beyond the fire's reach. Something's out there, Noah. Something's watching. He lifted his head, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted to the night. And there, on the other side of the flames, stood a man, maybe 15 feet away. The stranger was broad-shouldered, rugged, a typical figure for these parts. Mid-40s with a thick gray beard that caught the firelight, giving him an almost spectral glow. Noah's heart jolted, a sudden spike of adrenaline cutting through. The calm. He stood, the chair scraping against the ground, his voice tight as he called out, "What are you doing here? Where did you come from?" The man didn't answer, his gaze locked on Noah, a look that carried a weight of menace as if he were calculating something terrible. Then his eyes shifted, sliding past Noah to the cabin behind him, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a chill down Noah's spine. He's not here by accident, Noah. He wants something. The stranger began walking, his steps measured, heading toward the front of the cabin. He paused at a window, peering inside, his breath fogging the glass as he muttered something under his breath too low for Noah to hear. Noah called out again, his tone sharper, laced with fear and anger. "What do you want? Get out of here." But the man ignored him, turning away and walking toward the edge of the grassy field, where the land met a line of trees, and then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The encounter left Noah reeling, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. This wasn't random, Noah, not out here, not at this hour. A stranger appearing at his remote cabin at night with such brazen disregard for boundaries. It was beyond strange. It was deliberate. The man's behavior, his lack of fear, suggested he was searching for something or someone, and Noah's isolation made him an easy target. Shaken, Noah doused the fire, the embers hissing as they died, and hurried inside, locking the door. Behind him, he retrieved his sidearm from a drawer, the cold metal a grim reassurance in his hand, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. He's gone, Noah. But what if he comes back? Calling the police wasn't an option, not out here, where help was miles away, and response times stretched into hours. Noah was on his own, a reality that settled over him like a heavy weight. He resolved to stay awake, settling onto the couch, the gun within reach, his senses heightened, listening for any sign of the stranger's return. Hours passed, the cabin's silence broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows, each sound making Noah's heart leap. He fought against exhaustion, his eyelids growing heavier with each passing minute. But the fear kept him tethered to consciousness, until it didn't. Sometime after 1 a.m., maybe closer to 2 high, his body gave in, and he passed out on the couch, the gun slipping from his grasp, his mind surrendering to the pull of sleep. When Noah woke, the cabin felt different, the air colder, more alive. A steady sound filled the space, a soft howl of wind moving through the house, an unnatural current that shouldn't have been there. The door, it's open. He sat up, his heart lurching as he saw the front door standing wide, a gaping maw letting in the night air, the darkness outside a solid wall of black. He leapt to his feet, adrenaline surging, and ran to the door, his eyes scanning the field beyond, searching for any sign of movement, but the night revealed nothing, an impenetrable. When he shut the door, locking it with trembling hands, and turned to face the cabin, the realization sinking in. Someone's been here, Noah, while you were asleep. He stood there for a full minute, his breath shallow, listening for any hint of an intruder. Footsteps, breathing, anything. But the cabin was silent, save for the faint groan of the wooden walls under the wind's pressure. Check every room, Noah, be sure. He moved slowly, his gun in hand, stepping through the narrow hallway, checking each room with methodical precision, opening every door, peering into every corner. The cabin was small, its layout simple, but the silence felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. There was no one there, no sign of the stranger, but the open door told a story Noah couldn't ignore. He stayed awake the rest of the night, the gun a constant companion, his mind replaying the man's face, those unblinking eyes, the way he'd peered into the cabin. As soon as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold, Noah drove into town, filing a report with the local police. They listened, their faces grim, but there was little they could do. No description beyond the man's build and beard, no clear evidence beyond the open door. A few small items were missing, a pocket knife, an old watch, proof the stranger had been inside, walking through the cabin while Noah slept, but nothing valuable enough to explain the intrusion. What did he want, Noah? Why your cabin? The police suspected the man from that night was the culprit, but the motive remained a mystery, a question that gnawed at Noah. The stranger hadn't harmed him, hadn't taken anything of worth, so what had driven him to break in? The uncertainty was a weight Noah couldn't shake, a shadow that lingered over the cabin, turning every creak of the floorboards into a threat. You're safe now, Noah. But are you? 10 months have passed, but the fear remains. A constant reminder that the stranger could return, his intentions still hidden, waiting for another night to step back into Noah's life. Have you ever moved into a new place hoping for a fresh start, only to feel like something sinister followed you there? A few months ago, I settled into a modest one-story house, a quaint little place just a short walk from my new job. For years, I'd endured a grueling hour-long commute, so this move felt like a small victory, a chance to reclaim my evenings, to breathe easier. The house was perfect, small, with a cozy living room, a tiny kitchen that smelled of old wood, and a garage that creaked when I opened it. But the neighborhood was unfamiliar, a maze of quiet streets I'd never explored beyond the route to work. It was like stepping into a different world, one where I didn't know the faces, the sounds, or the shadows that lingered after dark. That night, I'd finished work at 6, the sky already darkening as I drove home, the streetlights casting faint pools of yellow on the pavement. I had another shift the next day, so my plan was simple: unwind, eat, and get to bed early. I pulled into the garage, the door groaning as it closed behind me, and stepped inside, the faint warmth of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. The kitchen. I warmed up some leftover pizza, the hum of the oven a comforting sound against the stillness of the evening. I was about to settle on the couch when the doorbell rang. A sharp, unfamiliar chime that made my heart skip a beat. I hadn't heard it before. I'd only been in the house a week, and I had no idea who could be at my door. Who visits a stranger's house at dusk unannounced? I walked to the front door, my steps slow, cautious, the pizza forgotten on the counter. Through the peephole, I saw a woman, perhaps in her 50s, her long gray hair falling past her shoulders, her face lit by the dim porch light. I opened the door, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. "Hello," I said, my voice tentative. "Can I help you?" She smiled, a wide, almost too perfect smile, and said she'd noticed I'd moved in recently. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were sharp, studying me as we spoke. She asked where I'd come from, if I had a wife or children, her questions piling up like a stack of cards. each one more personal than the last. I answered politely, keeping my responses vague, but something about her felt wrong, a subtle edge I couldn't place. After a minute, she wished me good night and walked off into the gathering darkness, her footsteps fading down the street. I didn't get the chance to ask who she was, but I told myself she was just a nosy neighbor, an eccentric old lady from down the block. But you know that feeling, don't you? When your instincts whisper that something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. I closed the door, locking it behind me, and returned to the kitchen, the pizza now lukewarm but still edible. I carried the plate to the couch, sinking into the cushions, and opened my laptop to find a video to watch. Something light, a commentary channel to fill the silence while I ate. The video played, a steady hum of background noise, but I couldn't shake the unease that lingered from the woman's visit. Her smile, her questions, the way she'd looked at me. It all felt too deliberate, too calculated. 10 minutes into the video, a sound from outside broke through my thoughts. A low, steady rumble that made me pause the video and listen. It was a car engine, idling. The noise louder than it should have been, as if it were right outside my house. I stood crossing to the front window and parted the blinds. There it was. A car parked directly in front of my house, its engine running but its headlights off, the dark shape of it blending into the night. I looked up and down the street, the pavement empty, the other houses dark and quiet. There were plenty of places to park, yet this car had chosen to stop right here, right in front of me. Why would someone sit outside a stranger's house, lights off, engine on, at this hour? I watched for a few minutes, waiting for movement, for someone to step out or drive away, but nothing happened. The car just sat there, its engine a constant drone, a presence I couldn't ignore. I returned to the couch, trying to focus on the video, but my eyes kept darting to the window, my ears tuned to the sound outside. 30 minutes passed, the engine still running, a relentless reminder of the car's presence. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more oppressive, as if the night itself had been holding its breath. I paused the video again, listening, but heard nothing. No footsteps, no doors, just an eerie stillness. I went back to the window, peering through the blinds. The car was still there, unchanged, except for the now silent engine. The street remained empty, no one in sight, just the lone car sitting like a sentinel in the dark. I closed the blinds, fully, a shiver running down my spine, a sudden need to shield myself from whatever might be watching. You ever feel like you're being studied? Like prey in the sights of a predator? I started cleaning up, gathering the empty plate and shutting my laptop, but a faint sound from the other side of the house stopped me cold. It was subtle, barely audible, but unmistakable. A soft noise, like something brushing against the back. Door. I was already on edge, my nerves frayed from the car outside, and this new sound sent a jolt of fear through me. I moved to the hallway, my steps slow, deliberate, my breath shallow as I peered toward the kitchen. For a fleeting moment I saw it, a shadow moving quickly away from the back door, as if whoever was there had seen me and wanted to hide their presence. My heart pounded, my hands trembling as I hurried to the front window. I looked out just in time to see a man, tall, his face obscured in the darkness, climbing into the parked car. The engine roared to life, and he drove off, the taillights fading into the night like the last flicker of a dying flame. I rushed to the back door, my pulse racing, and opened it, the cold air biting at my skin. I examined the handle, my fingers brushing against the metal, and felt it give way too easily. It was loose, far too loose, as if someone had been tampering with it. I pulled it slightly to the side and my stomach dropped. The inner workings of the lock were exposed, the mechanism compromised. He'd been trying to break in, and he'd been moments away from succeeding. If I hadn't heard that sound, if I'd been a second slower, he'd be inside right now. I locked the door, my hands shaking, and stepped back, the reality of how close I'd come to danger sinking in like a stone. I couldn't help but think of the woman who'd come earlier, her questions replaying in my mind. She'd wanted to know if I lived alone, if I had anyone else in the house, her curiosity now taking on a sinister edge. Was she part of this? Had she been gathering information, scouting me as a target for whatever they'd planned? It seemed far-fetched, but the timing, the car, the man at my door, it all fit together too perfectly to be coincidence. Let me tell you about a friend who'd moved to a new neighborhood years ago. She'd had a similar visitor, an older man, who'd come to her door, asking questions about her life, her family. A week later, her house was broken into while she was at work. The lock on her back door jimmied in a way that left it unusable. "They watch you first," she'd told me, her voice hollow. "They make sure you're an easy mark." I thought of her story as I stood in my kitchen, the pizza cold on the counter, the house suddenly feeling too big, too exposed. It's been a few months since that night, and I haven't seen the woman or the man again. But the memory of that evening lingers, a shadow that refuses to fade. I've fixed the back door, added extra locks, but I still check the windows every night. Still listen for the sound of an idling engine in the dark. Some threats leave no trace, but their presence never truly leaves. I don't know if they'll come back or if they've moved on to another target, but I do know this. In a new house, in a new place, you're never as safe as you think. The night was too quiet, a stillness that felt like a held breath, waiting to exhale something sinister. I sat in my office, bathed in the dim glow of my desk lamp, the world outside swallowed by darkness. But some silences are deceptive, and that night the shadows were watching me, their gaze colder than the glass they peered through. I'd been burning the midnight oil, a habit born from the relentless demands of my job. It was well past 11 p.m., and the house was a cocoon of solitude. The only sounds the soft hum of my computer and the occasional clink of my teacup against the saucer. I was racing against a deadline, my fingers flying over the keyboard, crafting a report that had to be finished in a few days. The tea kept me tethered to alertness, its warmth a small comfort against the creeping exhaustion that weighed on my eyelids. Staying up late was nothing new. I'd done it countless times, pushing through the fog of fatigue to meet the demands of my work. But that night the air felt different, heavier, as if the darkness outside was pressing against the walls, seeking a way in. The house was old, its bones creaking with every gust of wind, but I'd grown used to its quirks, its murmurs, its sighs. Or so I thought. What was that? A faint knock echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate, pulling me from my focus. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my breath catching in my throat. The sound had come from the front door, a light tapping that seemed to reverberate through the silence, bouncing off the walls like a whispered warning. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and peered down the hallway, the shadows stretching long and thin in the dim light. It was late, too late for visitors, too late for anything but the quiet of the night. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Maybe it was a neighbor, a delivery, a mistake. But at this hour, none of those made sense. I walked to the front door, my footsteps soft against the floor as if I could avoid waking whatever waited on the other side. I pressed my eye to the peephole, the the glass cold against my skin, and scanned the porch. Nothing, just the empty night, the porch light casting a weak glow over the steps, illuminating nothing but shadows. You imagined it. I tried to convince myself. Stepping back from the door, my heart still pounding with a rhythm I couldn't slow. I'd been so focused on my work, so lost in the haze of exhaustion, that I might have mistaken the house's creaks for something more. The wind, a loose shutter, a branch tapping the siding, it could have been anything. I shook my head, forcing a shaky breath, and returned to my office, the report still waiting, the cursor blinking impatiently on the screen. I settled back into my chair, the tea now lukewarm, and tried to dive back into my work. My fingers moving, slower now, my mind still lingering on that faint knock. The house felt larger somehow, the darkness beyond the windows deeper, as if the night had grown claws while I wasn't looking. But the night wasn't done with me. As I reached for my teacup, my gaze drifted to the window across the room, a black square of glass that reflected the faint glow of my lamp. And there, staring back at me, were a pair of eyes. They gleamed in the darkness, cold and unblinking, a predator's gaze that pinned me to my chair. My heart stopped, a scream catching in my throat as the eyes vanished, the figure darting away from the window with a speed that left me reeling. I sat frozen, my pulse a thunderous roar in my ears, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. It had been a man, I was sure of it, but the brief glimpse had been enough to sear the image into my memory, those eyes burning with an intensity that felt almost inhuman. He's still out there. The thought propelled me to my feet, my chair tipping over as I stumbled toward the window. I yanked the curtains closed, the fabric trembling in my hands, as if shutting out the night could erase what I'd seen. My breath came in shallow gasps, the air in the room suddenly too thin, too cold. I moved to the front of the house, my legs unsteady, and checked the peephole again, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me. But the porch was still empty, the night still silent, the shadows still watching. I turned to the back of the house, peering through another window, my hands pressed against the glass, searching for any sign of the man. Nothing, just the backyard, shrouded in darkness, the faint outline of trees swaying in the wind. The silence was suffocating now, a heavy weight that pressed against my chest, making every breath a struggle. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, circling the house, waiting for an opportunity. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. As I prepared to call the police, my eyes darting between the doors and windows, every shadow a potential threat. I moved back toward my office, my steps quick and jerky, my plan to lock myself in and wait for help. But as I reached the end of the hallway, I stopped dead. A large figure stood in the living room, his silhouette stark against the faint light, filtering through the curtains. He was tall, draped in thick clothes that hid his form, but his presence was a violation, a stain on the safety of my home. His eyes weren't the same as the ones I'd seen in the window. This was someone else, a second intruder, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. Run. Now. I turned and bolted for my office, my heart a frantic drumbeat as he charged. Across the room, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, the floorboards groaning under his weight. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling fingers, and pressed my body against it, bracing for the impact I knew was coming. But he slowed as he reached the door, his steps halting just outside, his breathing loud and ragged, a predator savoring the hunt. He paced back and forth, the sound of his boots against the hardwood a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. And then, from the other side of the house, I heard it again. A light knocking, a signal, a communication between the two men who had invaded my sanctuary. They're working together. The thought was a knife in my gut, twisting with every knock, every step. I stayed against the door, my phone pressed to my ear as I whispered to the police, begging them to hurry, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The man outside my door continued to pace, his presence a constant threat while the knocking echoed through the house, a sinister Morse code that spoke of plans I couldn't fathom. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each one a test of my resolve, until I heard the faint wail of sirens approaching, a lifeline in the darkness. The police entered the house, their voices sharp and commanding, their footsteps a stark contrast to the stealth of the intruders. I stayed in my office, my body still pressed against the door, until an officer knocked, his voice calm but firm, urging me to open up. They searched the house, their flashlights cutting through the shadows, but found no one. No sign of the men, no evidence of their presence, as if they'd melted into the night. I told them everything, my words tumbling out in a rush, the fear still raw in my chest. They couldn't explain how the second man had gotten in, couldn't say what the two of them had wanted, but they suspected the knocking was their way of communicating, a coordinated effort to trap me, to corner me. They'll come back. The thought haunts me, a specter that lingers in every quiet moment, every shadow that crosses my window. I don't know how long they'd been watching me, how long the second man had been inside my house, his presence a silent threat while I worked, oblivious to the danger. I got lucky that night, but luck is a fragile thing, and I can't help but wonder what will happen if they return, if the next time luck isn't enough to save me. It was a stormy Friday night, the kind Avery lived for, but as thunder rolled and lightning flashed, a figure emerged from the rain, his shadow a warning of the terror to come. Avery had just returned home from a long day at work, the weight of the week slipping away as they sank into the couch, a movie flickering on the TV screen. It was Friday, and a rare storm raged outside, the kind that didn't often visit their arid town. The rain battered the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the house with a restless energy, and Avery had left the curtains open, hoping to catch the electric dance of lightning across the sky. Storms like this were a treat, a chance to unwind, and let the world fade away. The glow of the TV a soft comfort against the tempest outside. Let the storm carry you, Avery. Let it be your escape. They stretched out, the couch creaking beneath them. A bowl of popcorn balanced on their lap, the movie's dialogue a distant hum as their attention drifted to the storm. Around midnight, as the rain intensified, Avery's gaze wandered to the window, and there, across the street, a figure caught their eye. A man walked along the sidewalk, his silhouette stark against the flashes of lightning, his body drenched, no hood or coat to shield him from the downpour. He moved with purpose, climbing the steps of a neighbor's porch, pausing as if waiting for an answer at the door. A minute passed and he descended, continuing down the street, disappearing into the rain-soaked darkness. That's not normal, Avery, not in this weather. The sight left a knot of unease in their stomach, a quiet warning that this night was far from ordinary. 15 minutes later, the unease grew into something sharper, more immediate. He's here, Avery. He's at your house. The sound of footsteps on the driveway cut through the storm's roar, deliberate and heavy, moving closer until they reached the front porch. Avery's heart quickened, their breath catching as the footsteps continued, pacing across the porch, pausing near the window, then returning to the door. There was no knock, no doorbell, just the unsettling presence of someone outside, lingering in the rain. Avery hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear, their fingers twitching toward the curtains. Don't let him see you, Avery. Stay hidden. They crept to the door, Each step measured, their pulse loud in their ears, and peered through the peephole. The man from the street stood there at the edge of the porch, his soaked figure illuminated by a flash of lightning, his face blank, expressionless, staring at the door as if he could see through it. Avery's stomach twisted, a cold dread settling in their chest. They watched for a few seconds, the man's stillness unnerving, before stepping back, their breath shallow, their mind racing. He's not right, Avery. He's dangerous. The thought of calling the police took root, the man's behavior too strange, too threatening to ignore, especially if he was prowling the neighborhood, targeting houses in the storm. Avery turned to grab their phone, but the sound of footsteps retreating stopped them. They returned to the peephole, finding the porch empty. The man gone, vanished into the night. The relief was fleeting, overshadowed by the lingering sense of wrongness, a certainty that this wasn't over. You can't ignore this, Avery. You need help. They dialed the police, their voice steady but urgent, explaining the man's suspicious behavior, his aimless wandering in the storm. The operator assured them an officer would patrol the neighborhood to either stop the man or get an explanation, but there was little else they could do for now. Avery thanked them, hanging up, and checked the door one last time before returning to the couch. The movie forgotten, the storm's thrill replaced by exhaustion. The night they'd hoped for, a cozy escape, was gone, replaced by a weariness that weighed on their bones. They shut off the TV, the house plunging into silence save for the rain's steady drum, and headed upstairs to bed, the storm's fury a distant echo as they climbed under the covers. Sleep, Avery. Let it all fade. They turned off the lights, the darkness wrapping around them, a fragile peace settling in, until it was shattered. A heavy sound jolted Avery awake, a violent impact from downstairs, like something slamming against a wall. He's back, Avery. He's trying to get in. They sat up, heart pounding as the sound came again. Louder, more forceful. A deliberate assault on the house. A third impact confirmed their fear. It was the front door, each blow making the wood shudder, the force enough to splinter it apart. Avery stumbled out of bed, their bare feet cold against the floor, and rushed to the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkened living room. The door shook with each strike, the wood groaning under the pressure, mere moments from giving way. He's going to break through, Avery. You're not safe. Panic surged, a primal fear that drove them back to the bedroom, locking the door behind them, their hands trembling as they dialed the police again. He's breaking in, they whispered, their voice barely audible, the operator's calm response a lifeline in the chaos. The operator assured them an officer was nearby, just a minute away, but before they could reply, the sound of splintering wood filled the house, the front door crashing inward, followed by rapid footsteps charging through the downstairs. He's inside, Avery. He's coming for you. The intruder moved with purpose, their steps echoing as they searched each room. A relentless hunt that drew closer with every second, the stairs creaking as they began to ascend. Just as the footsteps reached the halfway mark, headlights pierced. The storm, a police car screeching to a stop outside. An officer's voice cut through the rain, shouting commands as he burst into the house, his flashlight sweeping the darkness. The intruder froze, then bolted for the back door, his retreat frantic, the door resisting as he struggled to open it. The officer was faster, tackling him to the ground, the scuffle brief but intense, ending with the man in handcuffs, dragged to the patrol car. Up close, the intruder looked unhinged, his eyes wild, his face a mask of fury, but he refused to speak, not a single word passing his lips as he was taken away. He wanted to hurt you, Avery. He had everything ready. The officer revealed what they'd found on him. A heavy hammer, still wet from the rain, and a bundle of zip ties in his pocket, tools that painted a chilling picture of his intent. Why he'd chosen Avery's house remained a mystery, a question that lingered like the storm's fading thunder. The officer noted that Avery's first call had likely saved them. If they hadn't alerted the police earlier, the patrol wouldn't have been close enough to intervene in time, and Avery might have vanished into the night, another victim of the storm's shadow. They stood in the doorway, the broken door a stark reminder of how close they'd come to disaster, the rain still falling, washing away the traces of the man who'd nearly taken everything. The forest at midnight was a realm of whispers, its shadows weaving secrets into the night air, each rustle of leaves a warning I should have heeded. I ran through its trails, my breath a steady rhythm against the darkness, believing I was alone. But some paths lead you straight into the gaze of a predator, and that night, I wasn't the only one running. I'd always been a creature of the night, my life molded by the demands of my job, 4 days a week on 10 to 12-hour overnight shifts that turned my days into a blur of sleep and shadows. It wasn't easy, adjusting to a schedule that flipped the world upside down. But after a few months, I'd found a rhythm. On my days off, I stuck to the same nocturnal pattern, sleeping through the daylight hours and waking as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a strange existence, one that left me out of sync with the rest of the world, but it suited me, or so I thought. One of my rituals was a late-night run, a way to shake off the lethargy of sleep and reclaim some sense of normalcy. My house sat on the edge of a forest preserve, a sprawling expanse of trails and trees that stretched for miles, its paths a familiar maze I'd come to love. I'd run the same loop countless times, a 2-mile circuit that wound through the woods, the solitude and darkness a balm for my restless mind. That night, a few months ago, I woke at 9:00 p.m., the house cloaked in the quiet of evening. I went through my routine, breakfast at a time when others were having dinner, a few chores to settle my nerves, and then I laced up my running shoes, the anticipation of the run already quickening my pulse. It was just before midnight when I stepped outside, the air cool against my skin, the sky a deep velvet black studded with stars. The forest loomed ahead, its entrance a shadowed gateway that seemed to beckon and warn in equal measure. I started my run, my footsteps a steady beat against the packed dirt of the trail, the familiar rhythm lulling me into a sense of security. The trees closed in around me, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the starlight, plunging the path into near-total darkness. My headlamp cast a narrow beam ahead, illuminating the trail in sharp relief, but the shadows on either side seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their shapes shifting in the corners of my vision. What's that up ahead? The thought cut through the haze of my run, sharp and sudden, as a figure appeared on the path, too far to make out clearly but distinct enough to send a jolt of unease through me. I slowed my pace, my breath hitching as I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern details. He was standing in the middle of the trail, his posture rigid, his head turned in my direction. The closer I got, the clearer he became. A man in a dark sweatshirt and baggy pants, his face obscured by the shadows but his gaze unmistakable. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. As I passed him, my headlamp briefly caught his silhouette, and I saw his head turn, following my movement, his eyes tracking me like a hunter sizing up its prey. I forced myself to keep running, my pace quickening despite the ache in my legs, my heart pounding with a rhythm that had nothing to do with exertion. I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting him to be gone, but he was still there. A dark statue, Against the backdrop of the forest, his gaze still fixed on me. The trail looped around, a 2-mile circuit that would bring me back to this spot, and I told myself he'd be gone by then, that he was just a late-night walker, nothing more. But the unease lingered, a cold weight in my chest that grew heavier with every step. When I completed the loop and returned to that stretch of the path, he was gone, the trail empty, the forest silent once more. I should have felt relieved, but instead, the absence felt more ominous, as if he'd melted into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reappear. I cut my run short, the forest no longer a sanctuary but a labyrinth of potential threats, its shadows hiding secrets I didn't want to uncover. I left the forest, my legs carrying me back to the street, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I jogged the short distance to my house. The streetlights cast a faint glow over the pavement, a stark contrast to the darkness of the woods, but the sense of being watched clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I reached my front door, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys, the metal cold against my skin. I stepped inside, the warmth of the house a small comfort, and locked the door behind me, my pulse still racing. Grabbed a glass of water, the cool liquid doing little to calm the storm inside me, and sank onto the couch, trying to steady my breathing, to convince myself I was safe. He's here. The thought hit me like a physical blow, a wave of dread that washed over me as a shadow moved outside my front window. I stood, the glass slipping from my hand, water spilling across the floor as I approached the door, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest. I pressed my eye to the peephole, the glass distorting the world outside. And there he was, the man from the forest, standing on my porch, his dark sweatshirt unmistakable, his posture as rigid as it had been on the trail. He didn't knock, didn't ring the bell, just stood there, glancing around as if assessing the house, his presence a violation of the sanctuary I'd thought I'd reclaimed. I watched him for what felt like an eternity, my breath shallow, my body frozen, the silence between us a tangible thing, heavy with unspoken intent. He followed you. The realization was a knife in my gut, twisting with every second he stood there, his gaze darting to the windows, to the street, as if planning his next move. I stepped back, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with fingers that felt numb. My voice barely a whisper, as I reported a possible stalker outside my house. I returned to the peephole, watching him, waiting for him to act, to break the silence with some terrible purpose. He stood there for 10 minutes, an unmoving sentinel in the night, even as the police car pulled up, its lights cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. He didn't run, didn't flinch, just stood there, his behavior so devoid of normalcy that it sent a chill down my spine. The police approached him, their voices sharp and commanding, but he offered no explanation, no resistance. His silence, as unnerving as his presence. They couldn't hold him. Legally, he hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't crossed the line into a crime they could act on. But I knew better. His behavior, his stillness, the way he'd followed me from the forest to my home, it wasn't innocent, wasn't random. There was intent there, a dark purpose I couldn't fathom but could feel in the pit of my stomach. A primal instinct that screamed danger. He'll come back. The thought haunts me, a specter that lingers in every shadow, every quiet moment of the night. I don't run in the forest anymore, don't venture out after dark, but the fear remains, a constant companion that whispers in the back of my mind. I don't know why he followed me, what he wanted, what he saw in me that marked me as a target, but I know this. Some predators don't need a reason, and some nights the darkness follows you home.